Welcome to the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I'm Melisa Lieberman, a fellow IC and business coach. On this podcast, I teach you to become a consistently booked independent consultant without becoming a pushy salesperson or working 24/7. If I can do it, you can too. Listen on to find out how. Welcome to today's episode. We're on episode 144 of the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. And I am Melisa Lieberman, coach for independent consultants. And today we're going to be talking about arguing for your limitations. Where might you be arguing for your own limitations? I want to help you recognize this because it's one of the biggest blockers I find for independent consultants in their business, especially when you want to grow your business. Maybe you want to increase your revenues in the next year, in the next 12 months. Maybe you want to shift the nature of the type of work that you're doing. Maybe you want to increase the impact that you're making. Maybe you want to increase the average contract value. Maybe you want to increase your close rate. Whatever it is that you've got from a goal perspective in your business, one of the biggest blockers that I find for independent consultants is this concept we're talking about today, which is arguing for your limitations. Now, listen, might be a little triggering today. You might even get angry at me. That's okay, because listen, if you're angry, if you hear what I'm about to share with you and you notice that you start arguing about how I'm wrong, or you're arguing about how this doesn't apply to you, or arguing about how your case is unique, that is an incredibly important sign to take notice of. Because usually when we get triggered in that way, it's because there's at least a small grain of truth to it, if not a larger boulder of truth to it. So listen to this episode with an open mind and notice if you're getting triggered by something or feel particularly attached to something that I'm sharing with you that you don't want to give up. That is an incredibly important indicator to be noticing and to investigate further for yourself. All right. So I'm bringing this to you, of course, from a perspective of wanting to help you. And like I said, if you're feeling triggered by this or angry or noticing you getting defensive, then really take that to heart from the perspective of this is something that is really important to look into further. All right. So I guess the bottom line is if you get triggered by this or angry or defensive, that's a great thing and will help you to really pinpoint where you might want to move next in terms of working on your business mindset. All right. So another reason why I'm recording this for you today is last week we talked about evaluation. So if you haven't listened to that, it's episode 143, the first step of planning your next 12 months or even your next quarter, even your next month. So if you haven't listened to that one, go back and listen to that. But from that episode 143, and just from the day-to-day perspective of running your business, you're going to be getting insights. You're going to be getting insights into what's working in your business, what's not working in your business, and helping you to understand what might be some areas to address as a result of those evaluations, or even just your day-to-day thinking about your business. And some of those evaluations or the results of your evaluations, the results of you thinking about your business, some of them may feel fixed. They may feel immovable. They may feel unsolvable. And that's what I want to help you to address today. Because so often those things that feel just the way it is, this is just the way it is, they become big blockers in our businesses, increasing the time that it takes us to get results or even impeding those results altogether. And so that's why this episode is so important to help you see that whatever the feel like roadblocks or obstacles or just the way the world works or the way that business works or the way that your industry works, being able to see that those things are not immovable, they aren't insurmountable limitations, that's going to help you unlock an entire new level of capability of possibility for yourself in your business that you might not have realized was possible for you. So let's talk about the agenda for today, and then we'll dive into all the content. So, what we're going to focus in on are three main things. Number one, we're going to talk about what does it look like to argue for your limitations. Number two, then we're going to dive into, I'm going to really spend a bulk of this episode on three examples to help bring this concept to life and help you to see where you might be doing this to yourself. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with how to avoid making this mistake, at least the very first step of how to avoid making this mistake in your business. Before we dive in, I want to into that first step of the agenda. I want to make sure that if you haven't done so already, that you have grabbed the updated 12-month planning guide for independent consultants. It's a 5-step process that you can leverage to create a 12-month plan for your business so that you can start advancing further toward the goals and that ultimate vision that you have in your business. So go grab that if you haven't already. It's the updated yearly planning guide, which is now the 12-month planning process for independent consultants. You can go find that on my website, melisaliberman.com/plan. My name is missing so many letters. It is spelled MELISALIBERMAN.com/plan. We'll put that link in the show notes as well. Go download that and put that work into place so that you've got a really rock solid plan for the next 12 months from a rolling 12-month perspective. So it's not just about making the plan once a year and moving forward. It's about continuously updating that plan. So it's a rolling 12 months and you've got a really clear framework for evaluating your business and seeing where the room for improvement is and putting intentional plans in place to reach your goals. And part of that is looking at what you might be arguing for your limitations, uncovering those areas where you're arguing for your limitations, and then putting plans in place to overcome what may feel fixable, infixable, insurmountable, unmovable to you so that you can move your business forward and reach the goals that you never even realized were possible for yourself. Okay, so with that, now you've got the companion resource. So let's talk about first and foremost the first step on our agenda, which is what does it look like to argue for your limitations? There are things in your business that you don't think are possible. There are things in your business that maybe didn't go as planned, and you chalk it up to, well, that's just how it is. And so, if we were to give one phrase to today's topic, which is arguing for your limitations, it would be some form of that's just how it is. That's how it works. Another form of this is but Melisa. Sometimes on this podcast, we talk about the but Melisas, right? Where you're arguing with me potentially in your mind about, well, that's just not how it works in my industry, or that's not how it is for me. It might be that way for other people, but it's just not the way that it is for me or my type of consulting or my part of the industry. And that's what it looks like to argue for your limitations. It's justifying the status quo in the way that you describe it as out of your control. You're using this logic, and you're a smart person, my friend. Of course, you can figure out reasons and logic and justifications to basically explain why things are happening the way that they are. But look, nothing in this world is, there may be, I won't say nothing because that's a very strong statement, but there are very, very few things in this world that just operate in without any latitude, without any way of moving them, without any exception. So it might be that way for 90% of the population, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way for you. And so when you think about these areas of your business where you're just assuming that that's how things work, that's just how it is. And I'm going to get into examples here in a couple of seconds to bring this to life. But these are the areas that are where you're arguing for your limitations. A great indicator of this is where you feel defensive, even to justify your reasoning. When someone says to you, well, what's going on with the length of your sales cycle, for example, and you explain to them in a kind of defensive way, this is just how it works. The decision makers in my industry take a long time to make a decision, or the companies I work with are so large that it takes forever for them to sign a contract. Those kinds of things. Listen, these things make you feel better. That's why you're doing it. We all do it. I do it all the time. I do it all the time. But I know how to catch myself now. And that's what I teach my clients. How do we notice where we're just arguing for our limitation in our mind to make ourselves feel better, that something's not wrong with us, or we're not lacking something, just the way it is? The reason why we do this is to make ourselves feel better. But look, you feeling better isn't going to help you advance your business. It's not going to help you grow your business. It's not going to help you achieve your business goals. It's not going to help you to see what's possible in your business that you didn't in the past recognize was even an option for you. It doesn't help you to innovate or be creative as a problem solver. So, anytime you notice yourself arguing for your limitations, it's an incredibly valuable flag for you to say, look, how could this be the opposite? Or how could this not be true? How could it possibly not be true? And start opening the doors for you to become more creative and innovative. Listen, if Steve Jobs just argued for, this is just the way the world works, we wouldn't have all the incredible tools that we have from Apple, for example. There are so many people in this world who look at the what we might all of us might call the status quo and find other ways of looking at it so they can innovate and move forward and move past what feels like an insurmountable obstacle or just the way it is. So that's why this is so important. Anytime you're arguing for your limitations and the way I just described, it's an incredibly valuable opportunity for you to start digging into that and figuring out where the cracks are in that what feels like just the way it is. So let me give you a couple of three examples specifically here to bring this to life. This is a little bit meta, but let me just go through two paths here. If you see yourself in these examples, fantastic. That's great. You can start to then open up the door to the possibility that whatever you think is just the way it is may not be true. And then start unlocking ways for you to problem solve in your business and be more creative in your business toward finding solutions to get past what feel like obstacles. And if you don't see yourself in or your business in what I'm describing today, it may be an opportunity for you to look more closely. You may already be arguing for your limitations as we're going through this episode about arguing for your limitations. So if you're not noticing a connection to one of these examples, it's an interesting opportunity to look at that further and say, where might this be? Maybe on the predominance, it doesn't, that's not the way I'm thinking, Melissa. But I do notice in this one area, I am thinking in this way. And what is the impact to your business? So that could be an interesting way to look at this too, a little bit meta. Okay. So let's talk about the first of the three examples, which is market conditions. How are you arguing for your limitation as it relates to market conditions? So let me tell you what this looks like. It might look like you telling me or saying in your mind to yourself, the economy is slow right now. There are a lot of layoffs in my industry. Listen, that's probably true. You can look at any news feed and find a lot of justification for those sentences. But if you're taking that as just the fact that that's just the way it is, it becomes immovable. It becomes just a fact that you're now battling up against. And in that way, you're creating this argument with a lot of evidence, probably from the news, from data points, from industry articles, from other people you're talking to. You're creating a lot of evidence to build up the business case that this is just true. And the reason why that this is important is when you're thinking the economy is slow right now, and you think that's just a fact, just the way it is, then of course, the likelihood that you would slow down your business development is very high. When you think it's just the way it is, then why would you invest time in business development when it feels more futile, when it feels less likely to have an impact? It's hard to get motivated. It's hard to get motivated when you're thinking the economy's slow right now. There's a lot of layoffs. It's just things are not good right now from a timing perspective. So let's talk about how this example is that I'm sharing with you, market conditions, is an example of arguing for your limitations. You may say to me, well, this is just, this is a macro view, but it's arguing for your own limitations because while the economy might be slow right now, it's not 100% true. It's not 100% true that the economy is slow right now and therefore no one is engaging with consultants. It's simply not true. I can give you a lot of counter data points to show you that people are engaging with consultants right now. And in some ways, even more so than in the past, because the work still needs to get done and no one's getting headcount approved at the moment. So they've got to work around HR somehow. And one of the best ways to work around HR is to hire consultants who typically go through a more procurement based process, especially in larger companies. And so HR doesn't get involved and can bring in resources in a much different way in a lot of cases. So the example here about market conditions and how that's arguing for just thinking that that's true without questioning it becomes you arguing for your limitations because it means that you have two choices here. You can either agree with yourself and say, yes, the economy's slow right now. And that's why my revenue this year didn't hit the mark, didn't hit my goal. Or you can say, you know what? The economy is slower right now. And what other opportunities do I have to take advantage of that, to pivot in my business or to refine my business so that I am still hitting my goals? It doesn't have to be a limitation that I'm arguing for to make myself feel better. That's what you could be saying to yourself. So when you're thinking about something that feels like a fact, like these market conditions, you want to really catch yourself and say, look, it might be true that the economy is slow right now, but even if that's the case, so what? What am I going to do about that? How am I going to use that to my advantage in my business? How am I going to work around that in my business? It isn't a fixed and immovable fact that just justifies whatever your results are. So that is the first example, those market conditions. Okay, the second example is related to your own aptitude or capabilities. I hear this so often from independent consultants. This example, which is I'm not good at sales or I'm not a salesperson. And you might be saying to yourself, well, that's just a fact, Melissa. That is just a simple, hard and true fact. I am not good at sales. I don't like sales. I am not a salesperson. And you could give me a whole lot of reasons why that's true. You could give me a whole slew of examples as to how what you're telling me is a fact. But if you stay in that mindset that you are not good at sales, and look, I'm sure you could give me some good evidence. I'm sure you could give me some good evidence about how you're not as good at sales as other people are that you know. You could probably even give me some evidence about your personality and how it's just not in line with being good at sales. I'm sure you could if you can relate to this example in some way. And if you can't relate to the example in some way, I would suggest re-looking at it here because I hear this so often. I'm not good at sales. It may be broad brush or in some specific scenario, but it feels like a fact. And that's how it's arguing for your limitations, is making you feel better about, well, I'm not good at sales. So somehow you're operating your business without all of the tools in your tool belt. And it helps you to justify when you don't hit the mark, when you don't hit the goals that you've set for yourself. That's why you're thinking this way. It gives a good justification or a good excuse or a good quote unquote reason for why you might not be hitting your goals or why you can't set your goals bigger. This is arguing for your limitations. Let's talk about the result of when you're thinking, I'm not good at sales, or I'm not a salesperson, or fill in the blank about whatever it is that you think you're lacking to be even more successful than you already are as an independent consultant. When you're thinking, I'm not good at sales, of course, it's going to be more common or more frequent for you to take what comes across your plate so that you're just avoiding selling altogether. When you think you're bad at sales, you're going to get stuck more often than not in more staff augmentation or more execution related roles because it feels more like an interview when you're pursuing new business, which is more comfortable. That's what you've done in the past when you were in corporate. You have more experience interviewing than you do selling a solution. So, of course, you're going to put yourself into those scenarios that feel more comfortable. And sometimes you might even be dreaming of hiring a salesperson to do the thing for you. I heard a metric the other day that I thought really resonated, or which is really applicable to our industry. It was from someone in a different industry. But they were saying, until you get to about 3.5 million in recurring revenue in sales, you should be doing your selling yourself. Like it's pretty rare that you would get to a point as an independent consultant or a micro firm or boutique agency, even that you would be hiring someone to do the selling for you. So that's not the solution, my friend. The solution here is number one, really noticing that you are thinking, I'm not good at sales. That's your thought process. You're arguing in your mind or justifying how that's true, finding all the evidence of how that's true, building up the case in your minds to prove yourself right. And as a result, you're not able to build up and create those sales skills as quickly as you might have otherwise, or as deeply as you might have otherwise. You're not improving at selling when you think it's just a fact that you're not a salesperson or you're not good at sales. That is not a tried and true 1000% accurate fact that is immovable. When you're thinking I'm not a salesperson, it is not a fact. It is a conclusion you've made that justifies the status quo. It justifies the results you're getting to make you feel better, and therefore arguing for your limitations instead of saying, you might even say, I'm not great at sales right now, but it's possible that I can become an incredible salesperson. You see the difference there versus just telling me this is how it is and trying to work around it in your business versus looking at it and saying, this feels like a fact that I'm not a good salesperson, or I'm not a salesperson, or I don't have the personality to be a salesperson. And then figuring out where is the crack there. It's possible that I've actually sold things before. It's possible that I am good at sales, but I can improve, and opening the door to then being able to start building up that skill. Okay, let's talk about the third example, and then we will talk about the solution to this challenge. Actually, I'm going to give you the third example in detail, and then I'm going to list off a few more examples. Hopefully, that will give you some more food for thought about where you might be arguing for your limitations, some bonus examples. Okay, so the third example we're going to dive into in a deeper way is the sales cycle is long. You might have said to yourself, or even out loud, the sales cycle in my industry takes a long time. Or because I have a more complex type of consulting that I do, it takes a long time. Or the types of people I sell to, it takes a long time for them to make a decision and get approval. That's just how it is, Melisa. The sales cycle is takes a long time in my industry. What I'm selling is more complex and it takes a long time to sell it. So repeat of those so you can really digest them. Feels like a fact, right? Feels like a fact. But this is another example of arguing for your limitations. When you think it's just a fact that this is how it works, the result will be that you don't look for opportunities to shorten the sales cycle. You don't think about what could I be selling in this industry that on average takes a long time to make a decision, get it approved internally. You might be working with large companies where there's a lot of bureaucracy and moving parts and people to get on board, budgets, all the things. It could be very true what in a lot of ways that the sales cycle is longer for the type of work that you do. But when you look at that as just the way it is, an immovable fact, something you're having to work around, then you're blocking your ability to be more creative, to be more innovative, to look for alternatives to that way of doing business. And so that's why it's arguing for your limitations. This is not a limitation for you. It doesn't have to be a limitation for you. The sales cycle and the length of the sales cycle for the type of client that you're working with does not have to be a limitation unless you make it one for yourself because you're arguing for it. So the result here, if you just go down this path that the sales cycle takes a long time in my industry, then you're not looking at opportunities to shorten the sales cycle. You're not looking at what could I sell that gets my foot in the door quickly so that then I can do some more selling from more of an internal place, right? Where you're starting to get to know the players, where you're starting to understand their decision-making processes better. How do you get your foot in the door more quickly rather than just looking at it and saying, throwing up your hands and saying, well, the sales cycle is long, so I better endure it. You want to be able to work around it and challenge it and find new ways of doing business rather than thinking that's just the way it is and creating your processes around something that is not beneficial to you or your business. Okay, so those are the three examples where you might be arguing for your own limitations. Let me give you a few more examples and then we'll dive into the solution to this problem that we all face in our business. Look, I do this all the time myself. Like I said earlier, I have trained my brain to recognize where I'm thinking in this type of a way so that I don't continue going down the path and building up a business that is based off of these working around all of these different seemingly insurmountable or unmovable ways that the world works and instead look at where I think things are immovable and noticing that and then questioning them and figuring out ways around them or figuring out how what I was thinking is not true. So that is a skill set that is so valuable to you as a business owner to build up for yourself as well. That's the type of thing that I do with my clients also is really help them to see. It's hard to see from within our own brain where we're doing this. That's why I personally also have a coach at all times to help me to see this more quickly and not let it linger in my business for months or even years at a time, that these limitations are unnecessary to work around and in fact can be an incredibly valuable flag to say, oh, I see that I'm thinking that's a limitation. Let me go after it. Most people are also that you're competing with are probably thinking that's a limitation as well. How can you be the one who tackles it and figures out how to move around it rather than just thinking that that's just the way the world works and that you've got to basically deal with it, right? Some more examples here. Here's some other examples. You may relate to some of these or all of them of how you might be arguing for your limitations. I hear these types of sentences all the time. They feel factual and they are not factual. They don't have to be factual for you. Things like companies don't use consultants in my industry. My industry doesn't use consultants as much as other industries. Or I work with large companies and they typically only work with the big three, or they only work with, name brand consultancies, or I just don't have time right now for business development, or my industry takes a long time to make a decision. That's another flavor of the sales cycle takes too long. Or it will take me a long time to improve at this because it's so ingrained in my personality. Or it takes a long time to build a relationship with someone after I first meet them. I've been doing a lot of networking in my business, and it just takes a long time to build a pipeline that way. Those are examples of you arguing for your limitations. Those are all examples, while they may feel factual and true and justifiable And you can find a lot of evidence to support those sentences I just shared with you. Those are not 100% ironclad, immovable, never will change, always apply, the way the world works descriptions of what you have to work around in your business. Instead, what they are sentences that you could find a lot of evidence to support, but also they are ways of you arguing for your limitations, justifying what's happening in your business or why you set your goal where you did, which you have more capability of achieving something bigger. And once you notice these and are able to find the cracks in them, then it unlocks your ability to find ways to be more innovative, to find solutions that work around the challenges that almost everyone else is facing and probably haven't conquered. This is a fabulous way for you to differentiate yourself once you're able to recognize these and move past them. Okay, so as we're wrapping up today's episode, I want to share now that we have a lot of examples of how you might be arguing for your limitations, what do you do about it? I referenced during the episode that I do this all the time and now have a way to, have trained my brain to recognize it and overcome it. That's what I do with my clients. I teach them a 5-step process to help them recognize and overcome where they may be arguing for their limitations. And I want to share with you today the first step of that process. And the first step of that process is awareness. We really want to emphasize the awareness because it's the very first step and the most important step. And once you get really good at that awareness, then you're able to start implementing the other steps of that process. And so, what awareness looks like, there are different points in time in your business that you can really be building up this awareness. The first one is the one I referenced at the beginning of this episode, when you're doing your evaluations. When you're doing your evaluations, whether it's the last 12 months you're evaluating, like we talked about in episode 143, we'll put the link to the show notes there. Whether it's you evaluating as a discovery call that you just facilitated, whether it's you evaluating a networking conversation you just had, whatever it is that you're evaluating, notice for yourself where you're arguing for your limitations. Notice for yourself, why did something go the way that it did, and chalking it up to some form of that's just the way it is, or that's the way it works in this scenario. Those are incredibly valuable opportunities when you're doing those evaluations to apply this awareness to figure out where are you arguing for your limitations. You can also look for it in your goal setting. Be aware in your goal setting, where are you essentially arguing for your limitations because you think that's just the way it is. So for example, you might be setting goals for next year and you might be thinking, well, this year I did 500K in my business. And so it's practical or realistic to do 550K next year or 600K, or I don't have as much in my pipeline as I did in this time last year. So maybe I should be realistic and just plan for 500K again, whatever it is. When you're looking at your goal setting, notice where you're arguing for your limitations in that case. So you're not creating false ceilings for yourself about what it is that you can accomplish. Also, apply this awareness solution to your day-to-day thinking. Notice in your day-to-day thinking, where are you arguing for your limitations? Where are you justifying the way that it is? Where are you trying to make yourself feel better by looking at, well, this is just how my industry works, or this is just how my personality is? Notice it on a day-to-day basis. Build up that muscle in your brain to realize, oh, I see that again. I'm just trying to make myself feel better by arguing for the status quo. So those are some of the scenarios where you can apply this awareness, which is really a matter of you questioning, what am I thinking and how might this be arguing for my limitations? So those are some of the scenarios. And then you want to be asking yourself, I love this question so much. Ask yourself in this situation, whether it's an evaluation or goal setting or day-to-day thinking, how could I be arguing for my limitation in this situation? Just find one way. There's so many ways we argue for our limitations we don't even realize because we think it's just the way the world works, or this is a logical person thinks this way. Ask yourself, how am I arguing for my limitations in this situation? What is the one way that I'm arguing for my limitations in this situation? So you can start to recognize where this is coming up for you in your business. Ask yourself, how am I thinking this is just the way it is? Ask yourself, in what ways is the opposite of what I'm thinking true? Those are three really valuable, powerful questions you can be asking yourself to uncover where you're arguing for your limitations, and then to start to unlock other ways of looking at this, whatever this is in your business, in your goals, in your results, so that then you can move past it and you don't have to figure out a way to work around this status quo, but instead you can figure out ways to take advantage of it to make it work for you and for your business rather than being an obstacle. So listen, that's what I have for you today, my friend. I'm so happy you're here. If you want this type of help from someone who understands your business and understands the challenges and pitfalls and obstacles that are so common that you might not even be recognizing, that are preventing you from getting the results that you're looking for, that are preventing you from setting bigger goals that you might secretly wanting to achieve but don't feel are possible for you, reach out and let's talk about whether coaching is a good fit. You can find time on my schedule at consultmelisa.com. My name is spelled Melisa, so consultmelisa.com. I look forward to meeting you, and I will see you here again next week. Take care. Thanks for joining me this week on the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. If you liked today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, click subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app so other independent consultants can find and benefit too. And finally, to put the ideas from today's episode into action, head over to melissalieberman.com for the show notes and more resources to help you grow your consulting practice from your first few projects into a full-fledged business. See you next week.